Television news in the US first began to take shape in the late 1940s, shortly after World War II, and back then the news felt sacred. Every evening Americans tuned into the same voices, men like Walter Cronkite, Edward R. Murrow, and Dan Rather, trusted faces who spoke with calm authority. They weren't just reporters, they were the nation's conscience. And when Cronkite said something, people believed it. But what if even that trust was manufactured? What if, behind those polished desks and deep voices, someone else was pulling the strings? Because as we now know, CBS, Time Magazine, and a dozen other outlets were quietly working with the CIA. And it wasn't to keep you safe, it was to shape what you believed. And here's the part no one wants to admit, it didn't stop. It just went digital. Today, the lines between the media and intelligence are more blurred than ever, and it all started with a little-known program called Operation Mockingbird. So if the CIA could control the media during the Cold War, what makes you think they ever gave it up? And when every major outlet pushes the same narrative, is that journalism or something else entirely? Let's try and find out.
Hello, I'm Mike Droberg, Marine Corps veteran and filmmaker, and we will try to answer these questions on today's episode of Forgotten History.
In the wake of World War II, the United States had two things: power and paranoia. The Soviet Union was no longer an ally, it was the enemy. And in Washington, a new kind of warfare was being born: information warfare. Enter the CIA. Formed in 1947 under the National Security Act, the Central Intelligence Agency wasn't just created to gather intelligence, it was built to shape it. Inside this new agency, a man named Frank Wisner was given a blank check to run covert psychological operations. His mission? Make sure the world heard America's version of the truth and silence anything else. Wisner referred to it as his mighty Wurlitzer, a metaphor for a massive instrument that, once played, could make any country dance to America's tune. And how would he play it? Not with tanks or troops, but with journalists. This wasn't a rogue plot. It was the official US policy, signed off at the highest levels. By the early 1950s, Operation Mockingbird was fully operational. Funded through black budgets and hidden accounts, at its peak, the CIA had relationships with over 400 journalists across the globe. And not just reporters, but editors, publishers, broadcasters, and media executives. Some were recruited through back channels. Others didn't even realize who they were working for. And one of their first targets, the Associated Press. Soon the operation expanded to include CBS, Time, Life magazine, Reuters, and even foreign outlets. They weren't reporting the truth, they were reporting what the CIA wanted the world to believe. And the most disturbing part, almost no one questioned it. Many were paid under the table, some in cash, others through lucrative book deals, speaking gigs, or consulting work. And in some cases, the CIA didn't just influence the story, they wrote it themselves. A journalist would receive a pre-written script, already framed with the right political spin. All they had to do was slap their name on it and publish it. And it wasn't just news. Films, magazines, and even academic journals were shaped by CIA talking points. If it could sway public opinion, it was in play. The agency also created entire front organizations. Phony press agencies that looked legit but existed solely to pump out US propaganda overseas. And if a journalist refused to play ball, they'd be discredited, blackballed, or quietly replaced. The idea wasn't to control all the media, just enough to guide the narrative domestically and abroad. And it worked. From the Korean War to the Cuban Missile Crisis, from Latin America coups to the jungles of Vietnam, Mockingbird wasn't just a covert program. It was an information war, waged on the American people. During Korea, CIA front groups like Radio Free Press Asia, flooded the airwaves with horror stories of communist atrocities, many unverified, only to have some of those same stories echoed in Life magazine and CBS broadcasts. In Latin America, the CIA orchestrated coups in Guatemala in 1954 and in Chile in 1973. Major outlets like the New York Times and Time magazine ran editorials framing democratically elected leaders as communist threats. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, selective leaks and scripted fear pieces helped build the narrative of Kennedy's moral high ground while ignoring America's own secret missile deployments in Turkey. And in Vietnam, embedded correspondents often repeated military talking points provided by CIA liaisons, selling the war as winnable, long after it had become a political quagmire. For more than 2 decades, Operation Mockingbird operated in the shadows, completely unknown to the public, until cracks started to form. In the early 1970s, the Vietnam War had collapsed into chaos. Watergate was unraveling the presidency, and Americans were finally asking questions they should have asked years earlier. That pressure led to the creation of the Church Committee in 1975, a Senate investigation led by Democratic Senator Frank Church, tasked with uncovering abuses by the intelligence community. What they found was worse than expected. From illegal surveillance to assassination plots, the CIA was exposed as operating well beyond its charter. They had called them conspiracy theorists until the documents proved they were right. And one of the most disturbing revelations, the CIA had infiltrated the media. Senator Church confirmed that the CIA had secretly placed journalists inside nearly every major news organization, using them to influence domestic and international reporting. The public was shocked, and the CIA promised it would never happen again. And just like that, it was buried. The media moved on, no one was held accountable, and Americans were told to go back to sleep. But there was a problem. No law was passed to stop the CIA from influencing the media. No executive order, no internal purge. Just a quiet promise from an agency built on secrecy. In other words, Mockingbird wasn't shut down. It was renamed, rebranded, modernized. Because by the 1980s and 90s, the CIA didn't need to slip envelopes to journalists anymore. They had built relationships inside corporate newsrooms. They had former agents working as consultants for major networks. And more importantly, the media had become centralized. Fewer companies owned more outlets, less oversight, fewer choices. By the time the 2000s arrived, Mockingbird didn't need to call a newsroom. They could just let the narrative trickle down from the top. And in the age of social media, everything got faster. Leaks, talking points, anonymous sources, they all became tools in a war for control of the public mind. Today, the same intelligence figures who once operated in the shadows are now on TV, telling you what to think. John Brennan, James Clapper, Michael Hayden. All former CIA or NSA, now rebranded as expert commentators. The old tactics were already back. Iraq was sold on lies, yellow cake uranium, aluminum tubes, mobile weapon labs, pushed by anonymous sources and plastered across every major network. Afghanistan was framed as a righteous war on terror, even as it became a 20-year money pit fueled by contractors and false progress reports. And in Ukraine, dissent is once again taboo. The press doesn't ask if we're escalating a proxy war. They ask why you're not on board. Different decade, same script. The CIA didn't need to restart Mockingbird. It just needed a new reason for you to look away. They don't hide it anymore, because the public stopped asking hard questions. That is, until 2016. That's when someone came along who didn't trust the press, who didn't play by the rules, and who called the media what it had quietly become, the enemy of the people. When Donald Trump ran for president in 2016, he wasn't just fighting Democrats. He was fighting something older, something deeper. He wasn't a politician. He didn't owe favors to the media. He didn't respect their rules. And worst of all, he called them out. Fake news, corrupt press, enemy of the people. It was a declaration of war against a system that had gone unchecked for decades. And suddenly, the tactics of Operation Mockingbird came roaring back to life. Anonymous sources flooded the headlines. Stories based on leaked intelligence dominated the news cycle. Former CIA directors like John Brennan and Michael Hayden went from silent operatives to loud political pundits, painting Trump as a threat to democracy. The sitting president was accused of being a Russian asset, on the word of unnamed sources from the same agencies that once ran Mockingbird. Major tech platforms began flagging, suppressing, and outright banning dissenting voices. Narratives that challenged the intelligence community's version of events were labeled misinformation. The same journalists who once asked tough questions stopped asking altogether. The old operation was back, this time dressed in hashtags and digital fact-checkers. Whether you liked Trump or not, it didn't matter. What mattered was what you weren't allowed to say. You weren't allowed to question who suddenly had the power to silence you. The CIA didn't need to rewrite the playbook. They just needed to reopen it. Operation Mockingbird was never about keeping you safe. It was about keeping you in line. And the most dangerous part? It worked. For decades, people trusted the headlines. They trusted the anchors. They trusted the government to tell you the truth. Today, the same agencies that ran Mockingbird now shape the online world you live in. They don't need to burn books. They just bury stories. So ask yourself, if the press is free, why do they all say the same thing? If the truth is dangerous, who's deciding what you're allowed to hear? So the real question isn't if the media is lying to you. It's how long they've been doing it. Let us know your thoughts on Operation Mockingbird in the comments below.
Thank you for watching Forgotten History. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you have any comments or show ideas, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks again.